Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that in some places, ISIS is more powerful than it has been in years. Pompeo made those statements Tuesday during an exclusive interview on CBS This Morning. He also addressed new concerns that the terror group is gaining ground in the Middle East. In Afghanistan, a growing threat from ISIS could complicate peace talks currently taking place between the U.S. and the Taliban. Those talks are aimed at withdrawing American troops from the region. A recent Inspector General report confirmed a resurgence of ISIS in Syria after a drawdown of U.S. forces there. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin has more from the Pentagon.
Fighters in Syria taking an oath of allegiance to ISIS and vowing to fight on, nearly 6 months after the fall of the last pockets of territory that made up their so-called caliphate. It's a propaganda video, but it represents a reality acknowledged by Secretary of State Pompeo to Gayle King on CBS This Morning.
So what we've always said is the caliphate's been gone and that there's always risk that there'll be a resurgence.
A recent report by the Pentagon's Inspector General said ISIS had solidified its insurgent capabilities in Iraq and was resurging in Syria. The report cited estimates that ISIS still has between 14,000 and 18,000 members in Iraq and Syria, and the opportunity to recruit more from among tens of thousands of refugees living in poorly guarded camps. The U.S. has 5,200 troops in Iraq and nearly 1,000 in Syria, where the top commander for the Middle East, General Frank McKenzie, recently told CBS News U.S. Special Forces are helping local tribes track down ISIS fighters.
They try to get in the desert up here, sort of an empty quarter desert of southeastern Syria, and our partners go out and get them, and we help them do that.
But ISIS is still capable of suicide bombings, assassinations, and ambushes.
Is it gaining strength, in your opinion?
It's complicated. There's certainly places where ISIS is more powerful today than they were 3 or 4 years ago.
In Afghanistan, ISIS claimed responsibility for this weekend's bombing of a wedding party, which killed nearly 70 civilians. ISIS is conducting attacks in Africa as well, but the deadliest branch is in Afghanistan. By U.S. count, ISIS has killed some 800 people there in the past year. Elaine?
David Martin, thank you. For more on this, let's bring in Asha Castleberry. She is a national security and foreign policy expert and U.S. Army veteran. She currently teaches at George Washington University's Political Science Department. And Asha joins me now on set. Thank you so much, Asha, for being with us. So just a little bit, first of all, of your background. You spent over 2 years deployed to Iraq and Kuwait. This was after the 2014 incursion of ISIS into Iraq. Based on your experience and your knowledge of ISIS, what is your sense of Secretary Pompeo's assessment regarding the threat that ISIS poses now?
Well, ISIS is a unique terrorist group. It has a unique way of gaining a lot of money in terms of international finance, financial support, as well as being able to establish itself as an international international terrorist network. So there's many groups along in the region that support ISIS. So it has a unique way of enabling its mission or its efforts throughout the region.
Interesting. So what are some of the places where the Islamic State may now be having a resurgence?
Definitely in Afghanistan. We saw that with the recent hit in Kabul, which is unique because they were able to successfully conduct a counterattack in Kabul, which ended up being more than 80 casualties. So we've seen that about a year ago where they had a reemergence of ISIS-K in Afghanistan. And also we're seeing a reemergence of them in Syria. Some of the areas where our local security forces that we've been working with have been able to win against ISIS, be able to build up those, rebuild or secure those areas, but ISIS ended up regaining those areas. So it's significant, especially in Syria.
So in Afghanistan, let's talk about that. It would seem as though the U.S. and the Taliban are moving forward with these peace talks. The obvious goal, as the president has sort of laid out, is ultimately he would like to withdraw U.S. troops, as many as possible, from that country. But I wonder what your sense is if that were to happen, or even if the knowledge of that, right? If the president decided this is the date down the road where U.S. troops will be withdrawing, even if it hadn't happened yet, is that essentially then sending a signal for some of these groups, say ISIS, that there will be a sort of security vacuum, that they can then go in and have a very easy time of it, kind of dominating the local population there and taking over?
Well, there's a couple points to note in terms of this decision. One is that it's in our strategic interest not to withdraw, even by 2020, due to the fact that as we're negotiating with the Taliban, we need to make sure that if the Taliban is going to help bring peace and security in Afghanistan, they need to be part of the effort of countering ISIS. And I don't think that's necessarily part of the negotiations. Two, I don't think the local security forces, like the Afghan security forces, are able to take on ISIS. They still are considered combat ineffective independently. They need the United States, NATO, the coalition there to support them. So those are very two key points that we have to take into consideration. So in order to really be able to effectively counter ISIS, there should not be a U.S. troop withdrawal, and we have to make sure that Afghanistan, especially after the upcoming September 2019 elections, will be able to stand on its feet to be able to effectively counter ISIS.
I mean, so as a former member of the anti-ISIS military campaign, is there a scenario in which you could envision a sort of quote-unquote successful exit strategy for the U.S. from Afghanistan?
A successful exit strategy is that you have the national government being able to have a national security forces to independently be able to be equipped to go against terrorist groups like ISIS. If they can't do that alone, I would say the international community will have to be able to continue to support them until they're be able to do that. And that could take for many years, you know.
They're not close right now, do you think,
Right,
in your assessment?
Right, they are not close. They're not there yet to independently take on going against security threats towards their country. So it is going to take some time.
So the president has repeatedly said that ISIS was defeated. Let's listen to what he said, first of all.
The United States military, our coalition partners, and the Syrian Democratic Forces have liberated virtually all of the territory previously held by ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Tremendous progress has been made. You know also about 100% of the caliphate in Syria that's taken place as of a few days ago. ISIS's territorial caliphate in Syria and Iraq has been completely obliterated, defeated. The ISIS caliphate that you've been hearing so much about has been totally obliterated 100%.
All right, so, you know, obviously the situation on the ground changes, but based on your knowledge of the group itself, of the Islamic State, what is your sense of the president's remarks there?
Well, first of all, the reemergence of ISIS has been going on for quite some time under his presidency since he started. Based on intelligence reports, open sources, ISIS has been able to reemerge in so many different areas. But I will say that in terms of domestic attacks in our homeland, yes, that has significantly dropped. So it's believable when you have the President of the United States that says, hey, we're defeating ISIS, because the number of attacks have dropped towards the end of Obama administration into his administration. But if you're not paying attention to the developments overseas, you will see that they have been able to reemerge for quite some time.
All right, something that we'll continue to watch. Asha Castleberry. Asha, thanks very much for coming in and sharing your perspective.
Yes.